I know, but
if
I'm China and I'm looking at that reality,
Absolutely.
I'm thinking I could win this.
And that's why it's dangerous, because China's undertaking the fastest, most rapid, most expansive peacetime military buildup in the history of the world. Not in modern history, in the history of the world. We don't have a shipbuilding industry. We have some shipbuilding in the United States, but not nearly at the scale the Chinese do. It's not just that we're not spending the money on it, it's we don't have the ability to do it. Well, the only reason why the U.S. would ever be in decline is if we made bad decisions and continued to allow them to perpetuate.
A lot of Republicans and a lot of conservatives have become skeptical of NATO as an institution. They question the outsized funding the U.S. provides, whether or not it's in our interest to remain in it. Why is NATO a good idea, if you still think it's a good idea? And what would you say to people in your party that think NATO should be dissolved?
Well, I think there's two separate issues involved. Is NATO a good idea as a concept? And yeah, it is. I think alliances are always good. To be able to enter into a defense alliance with advanced economies and advanced militaries, it's a force multiplier for the United States. So absolutely, NATO is in our interest. Now, the question is, what kind of NATO? It has to be a NATO in which your partners are carrying their weight. And when you see a NATO where you have countries that are spending 1%, 1.1% of their GDP, 1.2%, then that's really not an alliance, that's a dependency. Now, to be fair, there are other countries like Poland that are doing more than their fair share. And there are other countries that frankly have not invested in their defense capabilities for almost 3 decades. So what the president's point has been is he wants to be in NATO, but a NATO that's real, a NATO that actually is strong, a NATO in which every partner is contributing at scale. And we haven't had that. Now, we've started to see movement. We've started to see more and more countries dedicate more and more money to their defense, thanks to the pressure that President Trump has put on. And by the way, virtually every American president in the last 25 years has complained that NATO partners aren't doing enough. President Trump is the only one that's actually insisted on it in a way that's actually gotten results. So it's on a good trajectory. So NATO is good as long as NATO is real, as long as it's a real defense alliance, not the United States and a bunch of junior partners that aren't doing their fair share.
One of the areas where it's unclear to many people if it's strategic and a Trump sort of negotiating tactic or sincere is the question of tariffs. And that's because there have been sort of two messages coming out of the White House. There's the Peter Navarro school, which is basically tariffs are an end in and of themselves. They're a way to rebuild American industries that have suffered from foreign competitions. And then the other view, and this is more the Treasury Secretary, is they're strategic. They are a pressure position. They are a way to extract meaningful concessions from other countries and get them to move. Which is it?
I think it's both, and I think both are legitimate. I think there are some industries that are critical to the future of the United States, and we have to have a domestic capability. We have to be able to do things like build ships. We have to be able to do things that are critical to our national security, our pharmaceutical industry. And then there's the broader question of whether the state of current global trade is fair to the United States. And unfortunately, across multiple administrations and presidents in both parties, especially since 1991, we have allowed very dangerous trade imbalances to build up. As I travel around the world, in virtually every country I go to, you can't find an American car on the road. Many American products are not allowed in, sometimes because of tariffs, sometimes because of non-tariff barriers, all kinds of things they put up. That just can't continue. Maybe that made sense 50 years ago when these were poor developing countries that we hoped wouldn't fall into the Soviet orbit. But now these are advanced economies. The EU, if you take the EU holistically, its economy is the same as the United States. These are advanced economies. Why would there be such a massive trade imbalance between two advanced economies, the EU and the United States? That's not sustainable. That needs to be recalibrated and that's to be fixed. In the case of the Chinese, it's an export-driven economy. They can sell and export whatever they want into the U.S., but they severely restrict what we can send them. That's not sustainable. That has to be confronted. And we don't have 10 years to figure this out now. We have like 1, 2, or 3 years to figure it out. So I think it's a combination of both industries that we need in our country and need to be protected, but also the broader issue of resetting the baseline for global trade in a way that's sustainable to the national interest of the United States.
The Treasury Secretary reportedly told investors at this closed-door JP Morgan summit today, and I'm quoting from him, there will be a de-escalation, and then I'm reading in President Trump's trade war with China in the very near future. And then he added this, no one thinks the current status quo is sustainable. So what can we expect next?
Well, I can't answer for what he said. I wasn't in that meeting, and I certainly don't speak. It's not the State Department's not running the tariff negotiations. I will say this. As far as people are talking about the price that tariffs are going to have on the U.S. economy, it's also having a tremendous price on the Chinese economy. That's an export-driven economy. Their entire economy is built not on consumption domestically, but on what they can overproduce and dump onto economies all over the world. All over the world. The Europeans had to stop them from selling electric cars, or they were going to wipe out the European electric car industry. So I think China's paying a heavy price. So I would say, without commenting on what the Secretary of Treasury said, that there's vulnerability to the Chinese side as well. But at some point, this issue had to be brought to a head, because the trade imbalance and the unfairness that exists between the Chinese and the United States is simply unsustainable. It's more than unsustainable. It's dangerous. It's geopolitically dangerous. And it needed to be confronted. And we can't wait any longer to do it. We've allowed this to go on for 25 years. And it cannot continue, or we're going to wind up living in a world in which we depend on China for everything critical to our security and to our prosperity. And that's not a world that we intend to leave for our children and grandchildren.
Is China the number one defense priority that America faces?
I think China is the number one challenge on every front that I can imagine. Geopolitically, national security, economically, industrially. And look, the president says this all the time, and I agree. We don't blame the Chinese. The Chinese have done what we would have done if we were the leaders of China. They looked, the previous leaders in this country and around the world allowed them to cheat and steal and get these unfair advantages, and they took them. Why wouldn't they? But now it's got to be fixed. It's got to be fixed.
Let's look just objectively at where we stand versus China. The U.S. Navy is the smallest it has been since World War I. Our Army is the smallest it has been since World War II. Our Air Force is smaller and older than it used to be. And meanwhile, China has the world's largest army and the world's largest navy. They build more ships in a month, I think this will shock people, than we do in a year. And meantime, we are cutting defense spending. What are we doing to prepare for a possible war with China? If one came, could we win it?
What we want to do is prevent a war from China by being strong enough to make them understand that they could never win a war against the United States. A war against China would be a terrible thing.
I know, but if I'm China and I'm looking at that reality, absolutely, I'm thinking I could win this.
And that's why it's dangerous, because China's undertaking the fastest, most rapid, most expansive peacetime military buildup in the history of the world. Not in modern history, in the history of the world. Meanwhile, the United States has lagged behind for a variety of different reasons. You talk about the Navy as an example. We don't have a shipbuilding industry. We have some shipbuilding in the United States, but not nearly at the scale the Chinese do. It's not just that we're not spending the money on it. It's we don't have the ability to do it because we allowed the nation to be de-industrialized. We allowed the United States to become de-industrialized, especially since 1991, with both free trade agreements and the cheating that we allowed when we allowed China to ascend to the World Trade Organization. And what it has done is de-industrialized us. We can't just build ships. Boeing struggles to build planes. We can't make pharmaceuticals. We depend on China for 88% of all the active ingredients in most of the pharmaceuticals that we rely on in our country. You can go down issue after issue after issue, and you can see that it's not just that we're not spending money on it, it's that we can't do it because the industries that would produce it domestically are long gone. They were outsourced. They were sent somewhere else, not just to China, but other places, but primarily to China. That's dangerous. It cannot continue.
In your Senate confirmation hearing, you talked about how the post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is a weapon being used against us. And that right now we're being called to create a free world out of the chaos. And I think a lot of people have different explanations, clearly, about how we got to a place where the post-war global order is obsolete, but everyone is seeing the reality of that. And I think feeling a lot of anxiety and concern from many different points along the political spectrum about what is going to replace it. And I think some people are feeling that the U.S. has almost accepted a declinist position, and we're now in a kind of managed decline. So I've wanted for a while to ask you two questions. Are we in decline, and is the role of our leadership to manage it as best as they can? And the second is, what comes next? What is the new global order going to look like? And what are some of the parameters of the American position inside of it?
Well, the only reason why the U.S. would ever be in decline is if we made bad decisions and continued to allow them to perpetuate. I think the road we were on under Joe Biden and previous administrations before that put us on a road to decline. I think what the president and President Trump is doing now is addressing the causes of it. You talk about the post-war or post-Cold War era and why it's bad. That post-Cold War era basically said free trade is important above everything else. We've now recognized that there are industries critical to a country and its national security and national interests that you have to be able to have domestically. You can't rely on foreign sources for. And that's why we're addressing that in the trade space. I think we realize that mass migration is not something that we can just tolerate. It undermines your country, it undermines your security, and that had to be addressed. I think you look at our alliances around the world, and I get it. You're a country that has this vast social safety network, that you have high taxes to pay for, and you're spending very little on your national security because America's got your back. That can't be sustained. We can't continue to engage in that way. That has to be corrected. We've talked about NATO a moment ago. You think about all these conflicts going on in the world. We have to prioritize them. I think if we become a country that spreads itself too thin, that basically is trying to go 100% all in on 5 major conflicts around the planet, you begin to exhaust, overreach, and overextend yourself, even for the most powerful country in the world. So I think we're beginning to address all of these challenges that could lead to American decline, not because somebody else, but because of the things we failed to do. And that includes rebuild our industrial capabilities here at home. One final point I would make is we are entering an era in which our foreign policy has to be more focused, more pragmatic, and more balanced. And that is that if we have to clearly define what is our national interest, remember what the issue is, and then we have to pursue that. And that means balancing things that in the past weren't balanced. In the past, it was democracy promotion at any cost or human rights promotion at any cost. We're not abandoning democracy. We're not abandoning human rights. We're just saying that has to be part of the overall analysis when we decide where to spend our time and what to spend our money on.
Secretary Rubio, the poem on the Statue of Liberty, the Emma Lazarus poem, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," is that still true?
Yeah, and there's laws that allow people to come here every day. The United States, every year on average, about 1 million people legally enter the United States on a green card and 3 to 5 years later can become United States citizens. We remain, despite all the specter out there, the most generous country in the world in terms of allowing people to come to the United States. All we're asking is that they do it through a process. All we're asking is that even the most generous charities in the United States generally require people that show up for help to fill out a paper and wait in line and sort of have their case evaluated. So we're not a charity, but when it comes to our immigration policies, no country in the world allows as many people to come in. We just ask people to do it legally through an appropriate process. What we can't be is a country where you can just show up at the border and say, I'm here and I'm here to stay, no questions asked. That's lunacy.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
妈妈是我的心肝宝贝，她值得最好的。想帮助睡眠，促进排便，我为妈妈选太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌。知道妈妈总舍不得买给自己，我来买。希望妈妈睡得香，假巴黎。现在就上快点购母亲节太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌宠爱妈咪超值专区，享各项健康好礼最高3重送，满5000加送520元购物金。透过中天新闻网 App 下单或输入 CTI 推荐码，每单再减50元哦。